Hey brothers and sisters, um, mentioned in the last video I did looked at Gideon versus Bel, that I was doing some Bible study for a small group at my church, and the story of Gideon really is in three successive chapters. It's Judges chapter 6, 7, and 8, and we pretty well finished chapter 6 today at the small group study, and so I thought, well, I'll come back and I'll just redo maybe a slightly shortened version of each chapter after I finish them with the church, and that way this will be a little bit of a backup. I know we got people that couldn't attend all three days of this study, and so maybe this will just be a little backup, and then for anybody obviously not in my church, which is just about everybody who will see this video, you can hopefully see some real impressive things that the Lord put right back here in the book of Judges. So just let me set a little context. What I did with the Bible study group is following through. Our leader of this group was looking for methods to study the Bible a little bit more in depth, and I just happened to come up on the list in terms of doing the teaching next. And so, I've got on this site a playlist that's about studying the Bible. And so I just took the group through in the first week this hermeneutic and exegesis set of concepts. And so if you're familiar with that, great, because I'll be applying this as I go through. If you're not familiar with that, you can either watch the ones I point out as I'm going through Gideon, or you can come back and take a look at this playlist. So that's context that I guess I got to assume you have before you get into the rest of this video. We're going to start here in Judges 6. I'm just going to read it through and give some verbal commentary as we go, because there's so much here that if I also showed you some of the written commentary that went with this, this video would be 10 hours long. But the neat thing is the Lord definitely showed me some things as we were going through here that was not in the written commentaries that I found, but it's definitely there in the Bible. And I hope you can see it as well. So let's start here, Judges chapter 6. The first thing I noted, and we'll note here, is names sometimes can really add to our understanding in the Bible. And again, that would be part of this hermeneutics and exegesis work that I had done prior. But Gideon means feller of trees, and yes, that does apply then to what we're going to see here in the story. The trees, and I'm going to tell you the the interpretation as it comes through the text. The trees, especially cedar trees and possibly oak trees, stand for the Nephilim or the Raphaim. They're known by different names here in the Old Testament. I suspect now, as we finish this study, you'll see that although we talk about like the Nephilim as just giants as one thing, I think what I'm learning from the text as I go through is a couple of key things. One is, although they're the product of the fallen angels mating with women, they didn't all turn out the same way. There was some that were noted quite for their height, like the Amorite, and then there was others that had other physical characteristics that were distinguished from a normal human, but weren't necessarily just their height that they were known by, and we're going to get there with the Amalekites. And the second thing I would note is it certainly appears that these Nephilim, Raphaim, whatever you want to call them, these product of the angels mating with human women that produced, the giants, and we're getting this from Genesis 6, and then Nimrod in particular in Genesis 10 with Nimrod, and then we get Semiramis and Tammuz. Actually, from studying pagan sources, is the root of all pagan belief. Actually, it's the root of all satanic belief. And we'll get into that in a minute. So the Bible likens these giants to trees, or uses symbolically, especially the cedar trees of Lebanon and the oaks of Bashan, in reference to these guys. And so let's take a peek first and kind of back up some of this stuff. Let's go to Deuteronomy 9 and verses 1 through 5. Okay, Deuteronomy 9. Listen, Israel, today you are about to cross the Jordan and enter and dispossess greater and mightier nations than you, who live in large cities that are fortified to the skies. The Anakim are strong and tall, and you know them. You've heard it said, who can stand up against the Anakim? But know today that the Lord your God is going ahead of you as a consuming fire. He will destroy and subdue them before you. He will dispossess and destroy them quickly, just as the Lord told you. After the Lord has expelled them before you, you are not to say to yourselves, the Lord caused me to enter and possess this land because of my righteousness. On the contrary, it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is dispossessing them before you, to confirm what the Lord promised by an oath to your ancestor Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Oh, so we get a bunch right away here. One is this land that they're about to possess. We've got the Anakim, which are strong and tall, who are legendary, right? Who can stand up against the Anakim. And they're also wicked. And we get that right here in the remaining 3 verses here. And so when people say, well, gee, how can you believe in a sadistic God that would tell the children of Israel to go kill every man, woman, and child in the land of Israel when they entered? It's actually because these were genetically corrupted races in here. Again, starting back in Genesis 6, the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, which are angels, came into the daughters of men. And that was the women alive at the time. Now this is just post-flood in particular that we're talking here. It's actually the reason for the flood prior to Noah was that all flesh had become corrupt, the animals and the humans. And in Genesis 6 we see that this problem occurred before the flood and after. And so now we're talking about after the flood, and in particular we're going to see here that Nimrod, who built the Tower of Babel and all that, was the root of all of these satanic worship practices that these, if you think about it, who is the ultimate fallen angel? It's Satan. And all the angels that fell with him probably received the same promise that Satan tried to use on Adam and Eve in the garden, that if they followed him, they would be gods. And so we get this notion coming through that these fallen angels came mated with the daughters of women as part of, they left their first estate, they were corrupt, and they produced these giants in the land. And so we see that here in Deuteronomy 9, 1 through 5. And this is the admonition that Moses was giving the children of Israel before they were contemplating coming into the land of Israel. It's sort of repeated down here in Deuteronomy 31. Let's take a quick look here, verses 1 through 8. Moses went and explained these things to everyone in Israel. Then he concluded, I am now 120 years old. Am I not able to get around anymore? And the Lord told me, you won't be crossing the river Jordan, but the Lord your God is crossing over before you. He will destroy these nations in front of you, and he will dispossess them. As for Joshua, he will cross over before you, just as the Lord promised. The Lord will do to them just as he did to Sihon and Og, the king of the Amorites, and to their land when he destroyed them. The Lord will hand you over to them so you can do to them what I've instructed you to do. Be strong and courageous. Don't fear, tremble before them, because the Lord your God will be the one who keeps on walking with you. He won't leave you or abandon you." Then Moses called out to Joshua and told him in the presence of everyone of Israel, "Be strong and courageous, because you'll bring this people to the land that the Lord your God has promised to give your ancestors. You'll be the one who causes them to possess it. Indeed, the Lord is the one who will keep on walking in front of you. He will be with you and won't leave you or abandon you. So never be afraid or dismayed." So you can see there again, the first verse was Moses telling them as they were heading toward the promised land that they were going to run into these wicked tribes and the giants called the Anakim. And here now we get the same story, and he is pointing out a different one of these set of tribes here, the Amorites, and they recognize this because on the east side of the Jordan, the children of Israel had to fight Og, the king of Bashan, and we read in the Bible that his casket was probably somewhere around 13 foot 8 by 6 foot, and Sihon, another king of the Amorites. And so hold on to this, because the Amorites pop up again later in our study, not too many verses in Judges, and you have to know that this is one of the tribes that God uses in terms of pointing toward the wickedness that's in the land. And the children of Israel being told here now to destroy all these nations, and God will actually do it as they approach these people groups, even though they're huge, they're giants. And so we'll look at one more verse, and I'm going to show you a couple of physical evidence or artifacts to kind of back up here what we're seeing. Let's go down to Isaiah 2, and we're just going to look at maybe a few verses here. Let's start with verse 11 and go down to 13. "The haughty looks of mankind will be brought low. The lofty pride of human beings will be humbled, and the Lord alone will be exalted at that time. For the Lord of the heavenly armies has reserved a time to oppose all who are proud and haughty and self-exalting. They will be humbled. He will take his stand against all the cedars of Lebanon, and against the proud and self-exalting, and against all the oaks of Bashan." So here you can see that haughty, self-exalting is a characteristic, and now you see this is an end times passage, and it's talking about the cedars of Lebanon and the oaks of Bashan, presumably being back in the land at that point in time. So for those of you that haven't been through a couple of my studies, there's a lot of biblical evidence pointing toward the ancient kingdom of Babylon with Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. Genesis chapter 10 is probably the end times Babylon that's referenced in Revelation 13, 17, and 18. And I honestly think even these giants, the Nephilim, the Rephaim, you certainly see indications like this, where what was known as the cedars of Lebanon, when used symbolically in terms of these, half angel, half human things, appear to return in the end times. So I think that's a pretty frightening. You don't want to be here for the end times, but we got to keep moving on with our study here. So let's go take a look now at Joshua 11. Because they didn't follow Moses' advice, they didn't go drive out all these Anakim, Amorites. They didn't go clean out the land here, and we're just going to take a couple of little quick peeks at that. So 11 coming down here in 21 and 22. And at that time, Joshua came and annihilated the Anakim from the hill country, that is, from Hebron, Debir, Anab, as well as from all the hill country in Judah and Israel. Joshua completely destroyed them along with their cities. Now that sounded okay. None of the Anakim remained in the land belonging to the Israels. They only remained in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. So they didn't completely wipe them out. They left them, and several hundred years later, who do we know came from Gath? Goliath, and David has to fight him, and he's a giant. And so you can just see here's one example of where Joshua made a valid attempt, and the Lord said he wouldn't drive them out all at once, but that they'd be driven out over time so that the children of Israel could fill the land. So Joshua was faithful. He did what he was supposed to do, but the individual tribes did not finish the way that Moses and God told them to finish, clean them all out. And so we'll see that now in Judges 1. So you can see the time progression here too. Deuteronomy is when we're looking at these references to the giants. It goes all the way back to Genesis 6, Genesis 10 at the time of the flood, and thereafter, Deuteronomy, a recap of the children, leaving Egypt and coming into the land and that type of thing. Joshua, after they crossed the river, Joshua had the children of Israel drive these giants out of their areas, but they didn't drive them all out, and it was supposed to happen over time according to Scripture. And now when we get to Judges, which is 200 years after the time of Joshua, let's read what we got there. Judges 1, verse 20 to 36. Okay, they gave Hebron to Caleb, just as Moses had promised, and he drove out the three sons of Anak from there. So there are still these Anakim folks there. However, the descendants of Benjamin did not expel the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. So the Jebusites have lived with the descendants of Benjamin in Jerusalem till this day. Well, there you go. There's one folly. Then the army of the tribe of Joseph attacked Bethel, and the Lord was with them. The army of the tribe of Joseph scouted out Bethel and had formerly named Luz. Now the scouts observed a man coming out of the city, and they promised him, "Please show us the entrance to the city, and we'll deal with you kindly." So he showed them the entrance to the city and attacked the city with swords, but they let the man and his entire family escape. So the man traveled to the land of the Hittites and built a city named Luz, and it's called by that to this day. So there they left some more. And the tribe of the army of Manasseh did not conquer Beth Shean and its villages, Taanach and its villages, and the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, and the inhabitants of Medigo and its villages. Instead, the Canaanites continued to live in the land. And so we'll finish it on verse 28 because it kind of puts a point down it. When Israel had grown strong, they subjected the Canaanites to conscripted labor and never did expel them completely. And as that goes on through verse 36, this was the problem. The children got into the land that they were promised, but they didn't finish the job. They left the Canaanites, the children of Anak, they left the Amorites, they left all of these mixed, genetically corrupt tribes in the land. They didn't completely expel them the way God told them to. And so there's the big tee up to Judges 6, because we'll see here on our chart that this was the story during the time of the Judges. Okay, here we're on a quick chart. I got this, I think, out of Wikipedia, but it just demonstrates the problem. So after the children of Israel got into the land, the promised land, and they didn't drive out all of these different genetically corrupt clans, then God used these genetically corrupt clans to come and oppress the children of Israel when they fell away from him. And here's sort of a little timeline. Now this goes back to about 1400 BC, right about the time the children of Israel entered the Promised Land. And what do they end up with? They have Edomite oppression in the 1360s BC, Moabite oppression, and then it's followed by a judge that ruled more or less righteously. And then they have a falling out again, and then they get the Canaanite oppression, and then you get Deborah, who is famous in the Bible, who was bold and brave and killed off some of these oppressors, and then you get the Midianite oppression, and that's Gideon right here, and actually it's the Midianites and the Amalekites that are right in here. So we're in about 1208 BC, and the crossing into the land of Egypt was at about 1400 BC, give or take, a decade or two on either side, but that's what we're talking about there.